Behavior, I think, absolutely. I think maybe it was already happening before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic just kind of like catapulted us a little bit more quickly than maybe we would have seen if we didn't have the pandemic. Definitely noticing a lot more wandering. A lot of needing to be out of the classroom and feeling like you can't sit in a space for a certain period of time. Conversation, I think, feels a lot more stagnant. Before the pandemic, I feel like maybe those kind of regular classroom conversations happened a little bit more naturally. I mean, even just, when I greet the class in the morning, you see it every single day, 2 people answer me. When I say, good morning, how are you, right? And that's pretty much like across the board for like all of my classes, really. Definitely a lot of, phones, I think again, I don't think that phones were not an issue before the pandemic. I think they absolutely were. And I think it's just become much more of a habit, like an instinct, right? Like if there's a pause, I go for my phone. And I find that I do that sometimes too, and I have to make a conscious effort to not do that. So I think behaviorally, we are starting to see some shifts, and I feel like there's maybe more pockets of kids, and it's less likely that kids are willing and able and comfortable with talking with kids that they wouldn't have spoken to before. So I guess, yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think in some ways, so during the pandemic, it was very much trying to find things that students felt confident being able to do on their own, because they, we had that hybrid schedule where, you were in school, then out of school, in school, out of school. And I wanted to make sure that students would, at least try and do the work that I was asking them to do. So, trying to revise my assignments either by providing far more in-depth directions, or changing the types of questions that I was asking, or changing the types of assignments that I was asking them to do at home. Maybe having them read a short piece independently and then do something in Google Classroom with it, rather than, saving that piece for in class. So definitely having to do a blending of both of those strategies. And then some of the things I liked about online learning, some of that independent stuff, I think felt nice for students to do things at their own pace and kind of say, all right, I'm going to give you this task and you have, the week to complete it. And then on Friday during our remote half day, we'll check in on it. So that's something that I do occasionally still try and use. So I think in some ways the pandemic made me a better teacher, because it kind of forced you to be creative about, how you were assessing and how you were incorporating materials into the class. And then I think in other ways we've kind of gone back to how things used to be. We kind of went back into some of those more stereotypical traditional assignments, which is fine. They worked, and I don't know that they are landing the same way that they used to, because the pandemic did disrupt what students were used to doing. So I think a lot of what I do now, I have to be far more intentional and purposeful about the scaffolding and the support that I provide, especially with things like writing assignments, like graphic organizers and brainstorming and in-person conferencing and revision and all of those pieces. I have to do a lot more of that in class than probably I did before. And again, I don't think that that's necessarily because of the pandemic. I do think it was starting already. And again, I think the pandemic just made it happen faster.
I think that the pandemic really stunted some of our students' social and emotional growth. Like, it came at a crucial time in their development as young people that made it really difficult for them to navigate social and cultural norms, not being around everybody for a while. I think being back has been wonderful. I think it's really created a strong culture of caring about each other, and resiliency. But I think there's still work to be done for students to really feel comfortable and caught up to speed with what's socially appropriate, and how to kind of manage their emotional regulation in situations that they just haven't had the opportunity to do so. And losing that amount of time, I think, has been really detrimental for a lot of kids, but they're working really hard to try to make that back. I think that more people have definitely come to see me regarding mental health issues and just personal counsel and advice, which I think has been a benefit since the pandemic, where kids are really looking for people to advocate for them and support them, and they're doing much better about advocating and recognizing their own issues in a great way. So yes, I would say that people are definitely more open to having conversations about mental health, which I think is really important. And I think that there's still work to do for adults and kids and families, but I definitely appreciate that this generation of kids post-pandemic is really advocating for themselves in a positive way.
I think originally there was a lot of fear through COVID, and some kids chose not to participate in the sports and in phys ed like they used to. But I think most particularly this year, we've seen a return to some more normalcy. I think there's still a little bit of fear that people have, but we, have shifted to be as accommodating as we can, knowing that, everybody's a little bit different. But I think now we're full go. We have probably 98-99% participation in phys ed, and the number of kids doing spring sports this year is back to the numbers it was prior to the pandemic. That's a great question. I think our population has changed a little bit since then. It continues to get more diverse. We continue to be more inclusive. I think if you go back 10 or 15 years, there were a lot more kids that didn't come to Westborough High School that now do. So we include them in all aspects of school, including phys ed. So the classes may look a little different, but we really changed things 5 years ago here to have all of our different quarter-length electives that you all take, so that kids can lean into the things that they really want to do for the rest of their life and be physically active. So I think we're at a really high participation rate now. I think the pandemic definitely had an impact, but we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, I think it has. Before COVID, I think I was more motivated, and after, I feel like going through being at home the whole time, I feel like I lost a lot of motivation, and it took a lot to get it back, but I feel like I'm starting to get it back now.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing here. My motivation really just started declining when COVID hit and when online school started happening. I think the lack of actual work we had to do really affected how I thought of my motivation would really, I thought it would stay the same, but it really just declined all the way down.
Yes, like I said with the motivation, I kind of lost it and then I gained it back, and I feel like that's kind of the same with my mental health. Being alone at my house, locked in my room for almost 2 years, whatever it was. Obviously, that's going to have a big impact on your mental health, and I think it did for me. But getting used to coming back to school and being in person, talking to my friends, all that stuff, it brought it back for me. But yeah, it did have a big impact.
Yeah, I think COVID did have a big mental impact on my mental health, because just the lack of people around me and the self-isolation just really affected me. Being alone all the time. So once I got back in school, starting 2021, freshman year of high school, I started to surround a lot more people, and it was just it went up after that.
Have you noticed a difference in your motivation throughout COVID and getting work done and self-accountability and all that stuff?
I definitely think that I've throughout the years have been very consistent and on top of my work. I think that with COVID and everything, it definitely made things harder for me, and going through COVID, I got a lot more anxious, and work was a lot harder to finish and just complete on time and everything. And I would say I definitely got it done, but it was harder and just overwhelming overall. But
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, relating to that, I've definitely, like, realized that mental health is much more needed to be talked about now. Like, it's been kind of normalized to talk about it post-pandemic, and I think, like, it's definitely become a more prominent feature in my life. Like, just obviously we've all gone through our things, but this past year has been different than other years. The ending of the pandemic, everything's coming to, like, a close. My junior year of high school, obviously one of the more stressful years of high school. I just am always asking myself, like, would this have all happened if we weren't in the pandemic, or if we didn't go through the pandemic and all that stuff? But I don't know if that's just me. But
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think it depends, like, or, like, it differs from different, like, ages and grades, because, like, it's obviously different in different years of high school. So, like, if you're a junior going through COVID, it's going to be a lot different with, like, the college applications. But, like, if you're a freshman, it's kind of just, like,
your new normal.
Yeah, like, we don't have to do a lot of work. Like,